everybody. So glad to see you here today. I think I know everyone, but if you don't know me, my name is Liz Cannon. My pronouns are AM and airs. I direct the LGBTQ Plus Resource Center, and I teach in Women and Gender Studies, but I'm also the coordinator of the LGBTQ Studies Certificate. And I don't know how much you know about that certificate program, but we began the certificate on campus in the fall of 2013. And actually that spring we had our first 2 graduates with the certificate. One of them is my program assistant currently, Eliza Farrow. And the certificate grew to a certain point. We had about 30 students who were getting this certificate, using it as they went into their future lives. But we have recently noticed a drop in students taking the certificate. We've got about 11 declared certificate students right now. And some of that is the fact that we have lost some faculty who have taught courses for us and able to offer quite as many courses as we have in the past. And because of that, we have just decided to decrease the certificate from a 15 credit program to a 12 credit certificate, which is actually in line with most of the credit certificates in the College of Letters and Science. So the certificate includes the Intro to LGBTQ Studies and then 3 electives. Our goal is to revitalize the program so that in the future we can actually offer an LGBTQ Studies minor in addition to this 12 credit certificate. And I'll let our other moderator introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Amity Harper. I use she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs pronouns. I teach full-time, I guess, in the Department of Professional Counseling, and then I also teach in Women and Gender Studies. I have been teaching our Trans and Non-Binary Lives course for, I don't know, quite a few years now, and more recently a BiPAN Poly Lives course. So I get to be a part of some of these things, which is exciting for me. I just want to say a little bit about today. So our purpose today is really to raise the student voices so that we can better understand the need for the LGBTQ Studies certificate, and also for curriculum infusion of LGBTQIA plus materials in all classes. Our intention is that this session will lay the groundwork for a 3-session faculty development CETL program that will address best practices for curriculum infusion and course development so that we can revitalize the LGBTQ Studies certificate. And we want to prepare all of our students for a world that's inclusive of LGBTQ plus people. There will be faculty development money available for those who participate in the 3-session CETL program. And our goal of these sessions will be to develop a syllabus that infuses LGBTQ plus content into the curriculum, which has the potential to be used towards the LGBTQ plus certificate. So with that said, I think we will move to our student voices, and Liz, you will start us with our first question for our panel. And again, thanks everyone for coming today.
I do just want to say that I have put the evaluation form for this session in the chat, the link to the form. The only thing you have to do is at the top, fill in the title of the program. LGBTQ Studies at UW Oshkosh, Students Call for Curriculum Infusion. And I will also hopefully remember to post that at the end as well. Amy will probably have to remind me. Very excited about our student panel today. We've got some excellent students who are joining us. And if we get all 5, we will have 3 who have actually declared the certificate and 2 who just take a lot of LGBTQ studies courses. So I'd like to start by having our students introduce yourself. Can you introduce yourself, name, pronouns, if you want to tell us your identities, what's your major, minor, any kind of certificate program you are in. And then tell us what made you decide to either declare the LGBTQ Studies certificate or to take a significant number of LGBTQ Studies courses. And let's start with Morgan.
everyone. Did you want my video on? I just have it off for now for
If you could put your video on, that would be fantastic. And then if we could have others in the session, make sure that you're muted and your video off unless you are asking a question. And I should say, you can put questions at any time in the chat and we'll make sure they get asked. So yes, Morgan, show us.
Okay, let's see. Okay, hopefully you can see me now. Okay, so my name, I have the questions here because sometimes they're kind of long. My name is Morgan DePietro. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'll share my identities with you. So I am kind of a complex human. So I am non-binary, bi, and also just generally queer in a sense. And so my major is actually Saxon performance, but I found throughout the course of my undergrad that I really am passionate about gender and feminist theory and everything like that. So I was going to do the certificate, but I did not because music is there's so many credits for music and I really wanted to graduate in 4 years. So I think I almost did the certificate and I would have if I had another semester, but not quite. So I decided to do the significant number of LGBTQ plus classes because I just found them super interesting. I think they're really fun. I really love the faculty. I think the courses that I've taken so far, I took the intro to LGBTQ plus, like the history kind of class, and I just loved it so much that I just decided to take a whole bunch of them. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Allie.
Hi, I'm Allie. Pronouns they, them, theirs. Identity is, oh geez. We'll just go queer and genderqueer. Not necessarily because it's easier for everybody else, more because it's easier for me to explain to myself. Women and gender studies major, and I've been taking a lot of classes within the certificate because they line up with my major really well, and it's like one of those things where it's like I also can get talked into stuff really easily. So I'm like, if anybody wants me to take their classes, just if I have time, I'll take it kind of situation, and it just kind of works out that way. It's kind of happened. So yeah.
Wonderful. So if anybody needs people in their class, just put it in the chat.
I might have recruited Allie into my class over this interim, the trans and non-binary class.
It's okay. I think Liz has too before, so it's fine.
Adrian. Is Adrian there?
Oh, it says yes. Slow internet.
Oh.
There we go.
Can you hear and see me now? It was being really.
Yeah.
There you are. Yeah.
Sorry about that. My name is Adrian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a bi-trans man. And so my major is secondary education English, and then I'm minoring in Spanish and social justice, and then doing the LGBTQ Studies certificate. So I decided to declare this because I'm really interested in LGBTQ history and queer theory, especially with being an English major. I really like to look at LGBTQ literature and how LGBTQ people throughout history have contributed to literature, both like individual authors and just like general trends sort of. So that's a lot of what I want to focus on. And as a future teacher, I really want to be able to accurately and effectively put LGBTQ content into my courses. And I think that this certificate will really help me with that as I, learn more about my own history and the community's history and theories.
And Adrian just wrote a kick-ass bi analysis of Giovanni's room. So. And last but never least, Christopher.
Are you able to see and hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Christopher Schimschuck. My pronouns are he, him, his. This is my dog. She's always here. So she'll be with me. This is Banksy. I identify as a gay cisgender male. And the reason that I decided to, I actually haven't officially declared, but I'm only one class away from finishing the program, the certificate, so I do need to actually declare that before I graduate this upcoming semester. But the reason I decided to take this is my major is International Studies with an emphasis on political science, and then I do have the social justice minor, and once I declare it, the LGBTQ plus studies certificate. But overall, I would like to get into international law, especially working with multinational corporations. So I think it would just be really important aspect in regards internationally when it comes to sexual orientation or gender identity. Learn constitutionally different rights everywhere in regards to LGBTQ plus and queer people. And I grew up in a really small town, so previously, before coming to UW Oshkosh, I had a very, very white male view of gender identity and sexuality. So just being able to have my mind so expanded was really, really important to me in my education. So.
Thank you, Christopher.
Okay, wonderful. So I get to ask you a kind of a follow-up question. So you talked about why you're taking it, but why do you think an LGBTQ Studies certificate program is needed at UW Oshkosh? What do you think makes that important? And I'm going to begin also with Morgan.
Yeah, so I have a few reasons that I think it's important. The first being that the certificate program allows for UW Oshkosh to be, to compete with other schools that also have programs like these. A lot of schools have comparable certificate programs, and it looks really good. So for me personally, I really am interested in schools with certificate programs and different options because I am pursuing graduate school. So it's something that looks really good on, your resume and your transcript, and also something that was really important for me throughout my degree with having this certificate program versus me not. Because although I didn't end up getting the certificate program, I still pursued the certificate program. It allowed me to tell my advisors I need to fit in these classes because I'm pursuing the certificate program versus just saying, oh, I want to take these classes because I don't know why, I just want to take them, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it kind of gave me, it certified the fact that I wanted to take these classes and I wanted to make room for them, and I'm pursuing this thing. So it was really nice for me, although I didn't get the certificate, I really thought it was important for there to actually be a certificate to, justify taking these classes. And yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Allie, would you like to go next?
Sure. I think just in general, the certificate is really good for rounding out any degree, and I can go into detail why probably in the next one. But I think that it's also validating for folks in the community just to have it okay, this school, it's just kind of one of those things where it's Oshkosh is at least accepting, we at least have a program and a certificate. So it's just one of those things where it's okay, we have, the resource center, we have the certificate, it is safe for me to be there, in general sense. And it's just, I don't know, it just feels very validating in general to have a program like Morgan said.
Great, thank you. Adrian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so part of it for me is also that idea of validation, but more so I feel like a lot of LGBTQ people feel like they don't really have a place in academia, or like that their stories and experiences aren't relevant to whatever is being talked about in their field. But honestly, LGBTQ experiences are relevant to every field, and LGBTQ people have contributed to every single field, every science, every art. Um, and I think that, you know, this program really helps, I guess, prove that and remind people of that, because a lot of people don't really, like a lot of LGBTQ people don't really feel connected to LGBTQ history, because it's been so like suppressed, and because it's just not taught about much. And then, you know, in a similar way, a lot of people who are like cisgender and heterosexual, they don't know LGBTQ history, and they haven't heard of like the different figures throughout history, who have been LGBTQ, who have contributed to their field, or just contributed to history and society in general. So I think, you know, the certificate really like helps demonstrate, both to people within the community and people outside of it, that LGBTQ people and their perspectives are not only like valid in the sense of like, hey, we're allowed to exist and have rights, but also like they're important. Like we contribute things that, you know, cisgender and heterosexual people uh, might not have contributed or understand it, just because we have a different experience. So we can bring like a fresh and important new perspective to things. So I really think that, you know, learning about this history and learning about our contributions is important.
Disconnected. Please wait a moment.
Oh. Sounds like we have.
Connecting.
Thank you. Thanks, Adrian. And then Christopher, would you like to chime in last for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of, you know, just to reiterate off like what everybody had said, huge part of it, you know, is in regards to validation. Growing up in Rosendale, I never had any validation of my sexuality, and being cisgender, I don't fully understand that aspect of it. So just being able to come to UW Oshkosh and learning so much about transgender individuals and non-binary individuals, two-spirit individuals, was really, really eye-opening. And it doesn't only, you know, show tolerance of LGBTQ plus and queer people, but it shows full inclusion and diversity. So in looking for a school, I think it's really important to have some of those things, just to be able to better help translate into people's lives that we are an accepting school, we are an encouraging school, we are a school that's going to always be here for the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that's just the most important part of it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you all. You are reminding me why I do what I do. We're going to change focus a little bit now, moving away from looking at the certificate. I'm curious how many of your classes that are not part of the certificate program include information about queer and trans people and culture, and why do you think it's important for them to do so? This time, let's start with Allie.
So this question was hard for me because like I haven't actually thought about it in a while, like which courses actually talk about queer and trans folks in some regard. And I want to say about like half of them have. Part of it is because I'm a WAGS major, and I mean like it's to varying degrees, you know, like it's not always like, I don't know, all about it or anything. And I think in general it's important because like almost everybody, if not everybody, will come into contact with somebody that is in the LGBTQ plus community at some point in their lives. And so just kind of having general information that they learn in their classes can kind of help, I guess, help them with that kind of thing. But it's also kind of like, I was thinking about it and I'm like, well, also, it can encourage them to like educate themselves on certain things where it's like, oh, well, we had this author that did this, said one thing, or I learned this term in class, but I want to learn more about it. So they can kind of go on their own time and do that if they want to.
Nice. Thank you. Adrian.
So I think most of my classes have, like, in some capacity, at least like mentioned LGBTQ people, but it's usually very like a small amount. You know, it's usually kind of in passing, and know, most of it is just kind of creating like an inclusive environment, um, and like maybe sharing pronouns and stuff like that. But in terms of like the course content, it's only there like a little bit. Like I took an anthro class where we were talking about like determining like the sex of an individual based on like their skeleton when you're like looking at either um, like a crime scene or like an archaeological site. And they would always be like, now remember, this doesn't necessarily mean like their gender. Um, it's just their like physical, biological sex. And so that's nice to see, but it's not really the same as like learning about LGBTQ history or something like that. And so I think there were only maybe like two courses where we really like went in depth. My honors 175 that I took was the social justice section. So it was basically intro to social justice. And every week we would kind of focus on a different social justice topic or a different like marginalized group. So we spent like a week on marginalized sexualities. So like gay men, lesbians, bisexuals mostly. And then we spent a week on trans and non-binary people. So that was pretty extensive, and it was incorporated throughout, you know, the readings, the lecture, the discussions, all of it, which was really nice. And then I took a literary criticism course where we read Judith Butler, and we talked about like the lesbian experience, and like the social construction of gender, and things like that. So that played a pretty big role in the discussion, and it wasn't just like we mention it and then move on. So like, that was nice to see it incorporated, but of course, those were only two classes where it was like a major feature. So I would definitely like to see it in more classes, because I think it's really important to, again, like I said in the previous question, show that you recognize that LGBTQ people have like contributions to these different fields.
Nice. Christopher.
Being international studies with an emphasis on political science, I would say there are often times that LGBTQ plus content is not talked about in my classes. A lot of my classes, I focus a lot on development and constitutional laws, so it's often not brought up in most of the classes that I take, especially because we're dealing with like a lot of third world countries. So, and if we're not dealing with third world countries, we're dealing with China, the Middle East, Russia, and the United States. So obviously in 3 of the 4 areas I just named, it's not heavily accepted. So it's not often mentioned or talked about, anything like that. But I'm never one to shy away from the subject, so it's something that I always make it a personal impact to bring up in my class. So even in one of my constitutional classes, you know, it was never once brought up until talking about South Africa, where the first constitution in the world to put sexual orientation into their civil rights protections. So that kind of sparked a huge conversation within our class, because I'm like, wait, out of every constitution in the world, you know, South Africa was the first one. But it's even the same for, you know, I just previously had a Russian politics class where it was really boast about the diversity in Russia, you know, when it comes to religion and people of color. You know, it is a very diverse region in that sense. But in regards to LGBTQ plus individuals, there's a lot of horrible activity continuously going on there, especially in Chechnya. And we had, you know, about nearly 3.5, 4 weeks just dealing on Chechnya. And my professor never once brought up the horrible, horrible, horrible actions that are happening there. So I'm like, wait, you know, we're having this great discussion on this place that, yes, is diverse in religion, yes, is diverse in multiple different origins that are in there, but let's talk about sexual orientation and let's talk about gender identity. Let's kind of bring those two things into the subject because what's happening is just unbelievable. So it's never against me to not push the boundaries or push the limits to kind of get more content in there. And I think hopefully doing that, you know, I've had pretty great relationships with my professors in that department. So I think with the number of LGBTQ plus people that are getting into international studies and political science in general, I think it's going to kind of be more talked about. But other than the classes specifically related to LGBTQ studies, especially LGBTQ plus policies that I took a couple of semesters ago, really dove into multiple different aspects of it. So I think even though it's not often brought up, that's why, you know, we're here today to have these conversations of, hey, why isn't this brought up? Why isn't this being taught in our textbooks, in our history to students who really need to know that stuff?
There's a question in the chat, but I think I'm going to let Morgan go first, and then we'll go to the question.
And Liz, it kind of addresses the same thing in the next question, so maybe we can integrate those two.
Okay, I'll let you do that.
That sounds good.
So, hang on, let me check. I was like so invested in listening to everybody's answers that I forgot what the question is. Oh yeah, so how many classes do I have? Well, because I'm in music, most of my classes don't talk about LGBTQ plus topics or intersectional identities really at all, which frustrates me because I can talk all day and then another day about some issues with classical music that I have. But I will say generally, it's, you know, aside from music history courses, which we have really great music history faculty here who, you know, include LGBTQ plus stuff and, you know, intersectional identities. Aside from that, I haven't really had a lot of experiences learning about LGBTQ plus people in my music courses, which is a large part of music history. And it's like an important thing to talk about, you know, because LGBTQ plus people are lacking in music, but we don't really talk about it. But outside of music, which I haven't taken a lot of courses like that, I'd say that I really haven't experienced a lot of talk about LGBTQ plus like content, unless we're talking about the classes that I took for this certificate. Those had a lot of content, like my Feminist Theory course had a lot of content. But aside from those, not really so much in those cases. And even in my music courses, when I wanted them to be LGBTQ plus specific, and I wanted to study LGBTQ plus people, I had to make the conscious choice to do that when we had like a project that was up to our interpretation, where you can pick, you know, what you want to study, and I would always study LGBTQ plus stuff. So yeah, it's kind of, I've been a little bit disappointed in that aspect with my classes, that we haven't really studied, you know, marginalized identities that much. But that's what I really like about the classes that I've taken for the certificate.
So we had a question in the chat, and I'm just going to read that out loud, and I think it really fits with the question I'm going to ask, so maybe we can combine those two. So Lindsay asked, have you found conversations related to LGBTQ plus people to be fully integrated into the curriculum, or does it tend to be highlighted outside the main narrative of the curriculum as a side note? For example, in U.S. history courses? Are queer narratives mentioned throughout the course or only in the context of LGBTQ plus rights and movements during specific moments in history? And I think that fits with this question, which is in those courses that are not 100% content courses, but do include LGBTQ plus material, how is the material incorporated? So which methods do you find most useful? Do they tend to include more information about some identities than others? And so just thinking about that question, if you can think about whether the content is included in lectures, in readings, in films, in discussions, or as Lindsay talked about, like inside or outside of the actual core of that curriculum, and then in creating an inclusive classroom climate. And let me know if you need me to repeat any of that, because I know that was quite a lot all at once. But Adrienne, would you be willing to start us off?
Yeah, so I already kind of touched on this with the previous question in terms of like how things are incorporated. In those two courses that I talked about that had like the significant amount of LGBTQ content, I think it was really well integrated because like in that social justice class, even though it was kind of split up week by week in terms of like you know, this week we're talking about sexuality, this week we're talking about like being trans, so like gender identity in that sense, and then there's maybe a week on sexism, a week on racism. It wasn't like strictly separated out like that. Even though each week would have a certain focus, we would still bring in issues of like, what's it like to be both Black and gay, or what's it like to be both Muslim and trans? So things were kind of still dispersed throughout, even though they were technically like, you know, separate topics for separate weeks. And I think that was handled really well. And then in that other course, we were always relating the different theories and theorists back to one another. So it's not like we talked about Judith Butler the once and then just forgot about her. So I think those were handled really well. But I know, like in the past, I've seen it where it's just kind of like maybe one day or like one topic is about LGBTQ issues. Like this is back in high school, but I took AP US History in high school, and we had one day where we talked about like Stonewall. And that's about the extent that we talked about LGBTQ people and issues, even though there's so many throughout history, and it's not all just like people who were part of like the gay rights movement. So that's pretty disappointing to see when it's just like, oh, it's one event or like one movement, as opposed to like LGBTQ people have always existed and they contribute to like different parts of history and different fields of study. Another thing with that, I guess, that I kind of forgot to mention with the last question is one of the reasons that incorporating us into courses that aren't like LGBTQ focused is so important. And it's that we aren't this like separate club that like doesn't interact with like the straight world, you know, like we contribute to all of these fields. We're just a part of society, just like cisgender and heterosexual people. So even though we have our own community and we have our own history, we're part of your community and history as well. And I think to have us separated out, like we're just going to talk about LGBTQ stuff one day, or we're only going to talk about it in like LGBTQ specific classes, it kind of furthers this idea that like we just kind of exist as like separate, like a completely separate society almost, which is just not true, and it's pretty unfair to all of the people throughout history who have made a huge impact on the world as a whole while being LGBTQ. So it would be really nice to see more professors like go out of their way to be allies and like include us both in terms of that, you know, inclusive environment, like even just something as simple as sharing your pronouns. but then also putting us, in the course content itself. It makes us feel welcome and it makes us feel valued, and it shows that like we're a part of these fields and we're a part of history, just like cisgender and heterosexual people are.
Thank you. I really love your statement. We're a part of your history too, and we're a part of that. That struck me. So thank you for sharing that. It looks like we might have lost Christopher for a second. I saw that he was kind of coming and going a little bit there. So I'm wondering more. Oh, are you back? Oh, there you are. Do you feel ready to jump in on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do just want to apologize for being cut out. My roommate's cat chewed my laptop charger for the third time now.
Oh, no.
A new charger will be here tomorrow, but so I'm currently on my phone. So if I get like a phone call, it immediately cuts me out. Then I have to get back in. So I do sincerely apologize about that. But kind of just, I heard about 99% of Adrian's statement, and just to reiterate what he said, I completely relate with everything that was just mentioned. I think I was really fortunate previously to being international studies. I was a history major. So I was actually really fortunate to have such awesome history teachers at UW-Fond du Lac, specifically Paisley Harris, that went above and beyond to make sure that in her classes, no matter what period of history was being taught, she always brought in multiple different intersectionality. So kind of like Adrian said, it wasn't just talking about racism, sexism, homophobia, things along those lines that relate to history. But it was, what was it like to be this person at this time with these many different identities? So that was really cool for me coming into college, because I thought, I have seen every season of RuPaul and I've watched Brokeback Mountain. I'm super cultured. And come to find out, I am not at that time. So I was really blessed to have such an awesome experience when I was in my history classes, because she was our only history professor at UW-Fond du Lac. So every class that I had was specifically with her. And I can say from 4 years, or previously like 4 years ago to now, getting ready to graduate, I've seen much more content being introduced into different classes. Specifically, I've taken a couple religion classes, and the professor at UW Oshkosh did a really, really great job of making sure to always intersect multiple, whether it's in relation to human rights in regards to like LGBT, women's rights, reproduction rights, things like that. But then also to like incorporate racism and intolerance and the multiple different aspects that just are revolved around all the hate that's in our world. But I think it has really, really improved, but there's a lot of improvement that needs to be done. And kind of like Adrian said, we have always been here, and not a lot of people, A, either know that, or B, like to agree with that. So I think it's just really important for youth especially to see that they're coming into a place that has content that's being taught in classes, whether it's a course that's related to LGBTQ plus individuals or not, because you often see times where other identities are added to this course, even if it's not specifically related to that. So it's time to start.
Thank you. Morgan, are you ready?
Yeah, my computer's just a little slow. Okay, so my classes that I've taken that have been really good about integrating LGBTQ plus material, the first one that comes to mind is my Feminist Theory course, which makes sense that it would incorporate a lot of material, but I do use that as like, well, although it's Feminist Theory, this is still the standard that I want my courses to be, because that really was like, I think I probably learned the most from that course than like any other course I have in my education, just because it was so good about incorporating every like intersectional identity and how they overlap, which I really feel like could be incorporated in a lot more courses than it is. which is basically what Christopher and Adrian have been saying about incorporating, more than just LGBTQ plus topics, but kind of looking at it all together, which is what, I think that's super, super important. But what I really enjoyed about my feminist theory course is that we also had discussions on it. I feel like it's a lot different, to be told like, well, this is, these are the identities, but to have like a discussion about why that is, to say like, you hear the ideas and then you kind of process it with other people. That's what I probably found most helpful. And I did not, that course, I did not feel like we talked about one identity more than the other. I really feel like we had a really well-rounded, experience of all the identities. With other courses, I have felt like, it's more geared towards, well, when we do discuss LGBTQ plus topics, it's typically like cis, and then like gay and lesbian sort of history. But what I really think, I think it's really important to talk about transgender history too, because a lot of times it's kind of forgotten. And yeah, I would argue that, trans people are one of the most marginalized communities, and yeah, they have like the richest history. So yeah, I think I covered all aspects of that question. But yeah.
Thank you. Allie?
So, yeah, feminist theory, I was in the same class, and I agree, Morgan. That was like the only one where I can say that it was like outside of the certificate that was like more encompassing of different identities, because like a lot of the classes that I've taken with the content has been like, we read a book by a lesbian author and then never talk about it, I guess. So it's just like one of those things that's just like, are we going to have a discussion on it? Yeah, sometimes it takes me a while to process things. So like being able to discuss with like other folks in the class or professors, or just like get everybody's interpretations kind of helps me understand my own. But yeah, that was like the main thing. And then what else did I write? Yeah, it's mainly readings. Not a lot of information on trans and non-binary individuals. It's mainly gay and lesbian. And the most beneficial, like I said, would be discussions, I think. And also, like, I feel like if you're going to have the information in your course, you have to be willing to do it because you want an inclusive environment in your classroom. I just feel like that's the only way that it really works. Because, like, you have to be willing to have those conversations if you're going to, like, read the books. Otherwise, it's just kind of like, okay, we read it. Good job. You get an A because you answered these 5 questions correctly or whatever. And it's just like, okay, but did I understand like everything that I wanted to understand? I think that's probably all I have.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
Really good point, Allie. There's a question in the chat that I think I will take. Christine Roth is asking, is there a place to announce classes that do emphasize LGBTQ plus writers issues but are not technically LGBTQ plus classes? I'm teaching one this spring, expat writers in Paris, that spends a lot of time on Stein, Barnes, Baldwin, Ginsberg, etc. as queer writers. But other than in the course description, I don't know how to publicize that emphasis. How do I extend an invitation to LGBTQ plus for these classes? I'm interested for future semesters. So I will say that when I first started the center in 2008, one of my projects was to find out who had been including LGBTQ content in their courses. And I created a major document about that. It was on our website at the time, but I'm going to be completely honest, with lack of staff and other projects that took over, unfortunately, that one went by the wayside. And so soon that list became dated and I didn't have it. It's always been in the back of my mind that we need to figure that out again, and we need to recreate that project. I think in the short term, what I can say is if you let me know about a class, I can send it to the two listservs, the Resource Centers listserv and the Hope listserv. We can put it on our Facebook, and there's ways we can do it. And then we can also look, Christine, to see if you think that your course includes at least, we usually use a rough estimate of 50% LGBTQ material, and then we might actually be able to include it in the certificate itself. So, wonderful. So our next question, and you all have talked a little bit about this, but I want to know, why is it important for you personally that there is coverage of LGBTQ plus content in courses and in readings? And Christopher, why don't you start?
Yeah, so out of all the questions, this was probably the one that was the most meaningful to me and like the most passionate for me. I never once in a million years thought I would be graduating with a bachelor's degree nor going on to continue my education after that. And I grew up in Rosendale. I went to Laconia, and it wasn't easy. It was very, very rough. And I never thought that I would, after that experience, I was like, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to deal with people. I don't want to do any of that, because yes, I learned a lot educationally. Personally, it really tore me down. And so when I finally made the jump to go back to school, that was one of the most important things, that I needed to have a place where I could feel safe, where I could feel at home, where I could go talk to somebody if I needed to. And I was really, again, blessed with UW-Fond du Lac, just because I had known professors. One of them was a person that I had went to church with. So it was a UU church, Unitarian Universalist. But after graduating from UW-Fond du Lac, I was like, okay, where am I going to go? I have my associates. I want to get to my bachelor's. Where do I go? You know, so looked at so many different schools. I was like, do I want to stay here? Do I want to go? And finding UW Oshkosh and immediately talking with Liz, like upon anything, it was just like, I know this is the place for me. Just to see that they had an LGBT resource center since 2008, you know, that was extremely important to me. To see that we had had hope for nearly almost 20 years now. So to see all of these long-lasting things at a campus was just so awesome to me, and nothing that I had ever seen or experienced or anything like that. And then on top of it, to see that we have a major for women and gender study and that we have a certificate for LGBTQ plus studies. Those were honestly so validating and so enriching and just so important for me. And I went back to school at 26, so I was a little bit older than the typical person coming into school. But if I think I would have been 18 years old and looking for a school, that would have been number one, top of my list of everything, just because I think it is the most important thing to support our youth and know that no matter who you are, what you do, what you've done, you know, you have a spot here, you have a purpose here, you have a place here, and you have people that will help you get through things together. And just having a school that has all of these programs, certificates, a resource center, is so drastically needed, and I wish more schools would be able to, you know, have programs that do that. And especially at UW Oshkosh, I think our LGBT students, I think our LGBT staff and faculty, they go above and beyond to help the people that they're working with, and I think that's just the most important part. And we're like above and beyond.
Thank you for sharing that, Christopher. Morgan.
Oh, there we go. Now my video's working. Okay, so I have a lot of reasons that I think LGBTQ plus content is important in classes, but I think the first thing that comes to mind is I think it's really important for people who come out of Oshkosh and to come out of other schools, you know, with a bachelor's degree or any kind of degree in general. I think it's really important for people to have a really well-rounded education, part of like the, you know, just liberal arts education. I think it's really important for people to get out of school and be able to know like basic concepts to like know what transgender means and be able to say like, oh, I know, you know, this person who is a transgender or was in history and was transgender, or know the difference between like gay and lesbian, you know, like topics that seem really simple to us, but to the student body, they might have no idea. I still know adults that, you know, like the reason that I say this is because I know a lot of adults from, you know, my high school and like different aspects of my life who, because of their lack of knowledge, are very damaging to youth, and to LGBTQ plus youth, to trans youth. You know, so these students that we're bringing up through Oshkosh, if we're never talking about these things, it's very possible that they go well into their adulthood and have no idea and have kids and possibly damage those kids, you know, damage kids that they come into contact with, hurt other individuals. It's just something that I'm really passionate about, and especially now that social media is such a prevalent force, and it's so easy to just go and post a status that's going to be extremely hurtful to hundreds of thousands of people. I just think it's really important to start educating people, and it's such an easy way, you know, just I mean, I'm not a professor and I'm not an educator, but I really think it would just be an easy solution to just sprinkle a little bit of LGBTQ plus history or knowledge into every course, a little bit of knowledge about people of color, and just start, you know, with all these courses that just have a little bit of information. It's going to make such a big impact in the end.
Really well said. And Morgan, you do not need a PhD to be an educator. Where are we? Allie.
So I think just in general, having LGBTQ plus content in different classes is just validating in general. Like I didn't even have terminology for being LGBTQ plus until probably a few months before I decided to come to UWO. So like I didn't even like come out until then. And then when I did come to UWO, it was because of the WAGS program, like the major, because like I looked at it and I'm like, okay, I feel like I can fit in with this. And then like I came here and like met Liz, and it was just one of those things where it's just like you have a place here, and it's just like, okay, like I can just unapologetically be myself here. And yeah, I agree with Christopher. I was raised in a small town, and that was kind of brutal. So like just kind of finding a place is really nice, and also like having it. Where was I going with this? Oh, like the LGBTQ plus information in like all classes is just kind of like a little bit of like a sigh of relief, I guess, because it's like, okay, somebody doesn't need to be getting the certificate to be getting this information. Like, I might not have to educate people for the rest of my, like, everybody I come into contact with for the rest of my life kind of thing. It's just like, okay, somebody else is learning this stuff. We don't need to start at, like, zero. Yeah, so it's just reassuring.
Thanks, Morgan. Oh, I mean, Allie, well said. I was thinking, to your point, that it's so nice that those of us in the community don't always have to be the educators. Really good point. Really good point. Adrian.
Yeah, so I think a big thing for me with why it's important for this to be taught is, you know, like what Ellie and Christopher said, it just like wasn't really talked about where I grew up. And like it wasn't part of the curriculum like throughout like, you know, elementary, middle, high school. And so I feel kind of like disconnected from like LGBTQ history and topics in a sense, because it's like I've only really had the ability and opportunity to like learn more about my history in that area in the past few years, pretty much. Um, and so it's really important to me personally, because as someone who's also ethnically Jewish, but was raised in a not at all like religiously or culturally Jewish um, household for most of my life. I also feel very disconnected to like that history, and like Jewish history outside of the Holocaust really isn't like taught in most schools. And that's not to say that being Jewish and being LGBTQ are comparable. I don't really think anti-Semitism and like homophobia and transphobia work the same way. But for me, as someone who's both Jewish and LGBTQ, like it feels similar in the sense of like I want to be connected to, you know, this aspect of like my life or my culture, but because it's not really taught about or talked about, I really have to like almost scramble to like catch myself up a bit, which is just really frustrating when it's, you know, something you consider to be a large part of your life, but yet like someone asks you about like your community's history and you're like, I have no idea, no one ever taught me. Um, so yeah, that's really important to me personally. I also think like, um, you know, when we do talk about LGBTQ topics, like has been mentioned a few times, it's mostly about like cis gay men and lesbians. Um, and so for me, like as someone who's bi and trans, that's just not really on the table a lot of the time. And there are so many people throughout history who like were bi or could be read as bi. If they had like the language available to them, they might have identified that way. And we just don't talk about them. And we just assume everyone throughout history who has been maybe like in a heterosexual marriage, like has been heterosexual. So there's just a lot of erasure on a bunch of different fronts, and that's like probably the main thing on a personal level that's important to me about, you know, teaching LGBTQ content, because it just shows LGBTQ people that like we can still like, you know, look at and understand and be connected to like our history or the like culture, so to speak, of being LGBTQ.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not missing a question here in the chat. Looks like just a comment. Okay. So the next question is, how do you see the LGBTQ Studies certificate or these courses, I guess, helping you in your career path? And we'll start with Morgan.
So I see these courses having a direct impact in where I want to go with my career. So I'm applying to grad schools right now in a lot of different places, but I'm looking at getting an MA in Women and Gender Studies. So without these courses, I could not get into any programs, and I would not be I would not be as eligible for the programs. So I definitely owe that step to the classes that I've taken. Even though I'm not getting the certificate, still having the classes is really good for me. And if I'm not, you know, it's not certain that I'll get into a grad school or end up going where I want to go. The future is a little indefinite. But even if I don't go to grad school, I still see these classes helping me because it's helped me develop a really well-rounded education about, you know, different people and different identities. So I would be interested in, you know, working with different groups of people, whether that be like working for victim, you know, like sexual assault victims, or working for like the Christine Ann Center, or working at like a homeless shelter. You know, all these classes would help you in these settings, you know, like so many different settings. And even if I don't know, even if I get a job at like Joann Fabric, you know, like these classes will always help at places like this, because any job that I go to, I know that I'm going to be able to help them create a more inclusive environment for their like guests and employees. So yeah, and I think like everyone who takes the classes would probably argue that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Allie?
So this is kind of a fun question because I had to think of what I want to do with my life. As as of right now, I'll probably end up working with youth at least at some point of my life, and I'm bound to encounter LGBTQ plus youth. And so just kind of like, in a sense, being what I probably needed when I was growing up. So just like this knowledge is kind of teaching me like how can I be better for both myself and for youth, and how can I improve society? Because I think anybody can kind of go in without that outlook. And also, like, I just learn a lot about myself in a lot of these courses, which I feel is beneficial, like, on a personal level. Um, and they all kind of, like, make you think about your everyday interactions and, like, even, like, things like the language you use. So, like, okay, maybe I should change that to this because it's less problematic or something like that. And just kind of, like, in a way teaching me to teach others without having to like, I don't know, really teach others, I suppose. Just kind of like, hey, maybe you should try to use this language, and then they kind of figure it out or whatever. It's kind of cool. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I just saw that Lux joined, Liz. I don't know if you saw that. I just lost where I was at. Okay, and then Adrian, you're next.
Yeah, so for me, because I want to become a high school teacher, it's definitely super relevant, because, you know, there are going to be LGBTQ students and fellow teachers who I'm going to be interacting with. And I think like a lot of the time people kind of think like, oh, like I'm an ally, uh, I have the common sense of just like treat people well. And they think that that's sufficient. Or in my case, I could be like, well, I'm bi, so I totally get it. And like that's enough for me to be like the perfect, most inclusive teacher ever who understands every LGBTQ student's experience. But no, that's not the case. You know, there are many LGBTQ identities that I don't hold, like I'm a bi trans man, so I'm not a gay man, I'm not a lesbian, I'm not non-binary. Like I don't understand those experiences firsthand necessarily. And so it's important for me to learn about LGBTQ identities outside of my own, but then also learn about like the different ways that it can look even within my own identity, because you know there's a vast array of experiences. Some people are completely accepted by their family. Some people are kind of like, we support you, but we don't really get it. Some people are full on disowned. Like, there's so many different ways things can look, and there's so many different ways it intersects with other things like race, or class or gender. And so, you know, I want to learn more about that so that I can be a more effective teacher and ally and friend to these students who maybe have a different experience than myself. And I think, you know, LGBTQ studies really helps with that. And it really just is relevant to me as a future teacher because I want to, first of all, set a good example and, you know, be inclusive and be an ally, but also understand, like, what is the best and most effective way to advocate for my students or to help them if they're facing bigotry or going through a hard time, maybe like with their family or financially or however else as it relates to being LGBTQ. So I don't think it's just a one and done, like, I'm going to choose to like be an ally and like you know, just treat everyone nicely. Like, that's very important to do, but it's not where allyship ends or where being a leader and being a teacher ends. So that's definitely how I see the certificate, like, playing into my future career and activism.
Thank you so much. Christopher's next, but before you go, Christopher, I just want to get Lux up to date. So thank you, Lux, for joining us. We're on question 6, which is how do you see the LGBTQ Studies certificate helping you in your career path? So maybe after Christopher joins, if you or answers, if you want to maybe jump in and introduce yourself and answer the question, we'd love to hear from you also. So thank you, Christopher.
Yeah, absolutely. To be totally honest, my career path is regarding around international development. So, you know, in more specifically, like working for a multinational corporation, doing like contract and real estate law for them. So I don't think the LGBTQ plus studies certificate or the content that I take in my courses will be too extremely valuable in that situation. The only thing I can think of is when it comes to such large negotiations, you know, there are a lot of political and social moves that go with them, especially when we're speaking about like third world countries. So I think that possibly these courses will hopefully be able to like give me an upper hand in making sure that what negotiations are happening are human rights based in all senses, not just LGBTQ plus individuals, but everybody that's involved. But in a complete overall sense, it is 150% helped my life in general better with my education. It's helped me be kind of like Adrian said, I'm not a trans man, I'm not a bi man, I'm not a lesbian, I identify as a gay cisgender male, so that's what I know. So these courses and the content that I learn are really, really valuable and important to help continue my activism, because no matter what career path I do, I will be an ally to those also in my community, but an advocate to teach other people, to help other people, even in the work that I'm doing now, and has come in handy in so much, you know, just between outside work and working at the resource center. So I think no matter what I'm doing, everything that I am learning will always be beneficial, and everything that I continue to learn will always be beneficial. And hopefully I will be able to translate that into my work. It just might be a little bit difficult, depending on who I'm working for, how out I can be, and everything along those lines.
Thank you. Lux, do you feel ready to jump in? At the beginning, some folks just kind of shared their name, pronouns, anything they wanted to share about their identities, and then just like major, minor, that kind of stuff. So if you want to share that, you can. Are you out there?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? There we go.
Yes, perfect.
Trying to get everything to connect here. Yeah, sorry. I am Lux. I identify depending on who I'm introducing myself to. Sometimes it's gender queer, but otherwise I'll say non-binary. Pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm majoring in the Women's and Gender Studies, minor in Sociology, and then the LGBTQ plus certificate. So then I wanted to get the certificate for, I think we're on 6, you said, for...
Yeah, so how does it impact your career? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Jumping in.
I aim to work with queer youth specifically. I want to work with, I've always thought about my guidance counselor when I was in school, and I was just really angsty teen and very unaccepted at home. And my guidance counselor always kind of gave me a safe place to go and made me feel heard and would work with me to help me to achieve my potential. And these are all things I was not getting at home from my family life. So I think about being able to do that for other kids and other people in general. That the what you get from these courses, it's something that you'll take with you, that you can understand other lives other than your own. It's like you're getting a little bit more of the story. That is a really great gift you can give someone else, to be able to listen to them. But then it's also something that, future employers can see that you've had this certification, that you know how to promote an inclusive environment. So I think that answered it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lex. Talking about your guidance counselor reminded me, just last week I was contacted by a counselor out in the field working with youth, who basically said, I realize I need the LGBTQ Studies certificate. So many of the youth I'm working with are LGBTQIA+, and I don't have the knowledge base to really work well with them. And so we're hoping in the future that she will be able to get the certificate. So that was kind of exciting.
Also, I feel like I need to make a shameless plug for the professional counseling program at UWO. If you're interested in becoming a school counselor, please reach out. I'd love to talk to you more about it.
We are at our last question. And so for those in the audience, if you could be thinking about whatever other questions you have for our group, know that your turn will be next. So our last question is, what would you like to tell faculty and instructional academic staff who are thinking about including LGBTQIA+ content in their courses? And let's start with Allie.
Okay, so my main thing for folks that I want them to know is just like, think about why you want this content in your courses. Like, do you just want it because like you feel like you need to, like, I don't know, fill a quota, or do you really want it to be an inclusive environment? Because, and I touched on this earlier, like, it's one thing to have queer and trans authors, it's another thing to not be afraid to have discussions. So like, first of all, consider that, and then like, don't be afraid to have difficult conversations in your classes. And like, the amount of respect that I have for professors who aren't afraid to tell me like, I need to get more information on that from somewhere before I can fully answer that question. Like, don't be afraid to be like, I did not think about that, and I think I just learned something, or I need to read more up on it more. Just because like, that makes me feel like, okay, you're willing to learn. You don't know everything, like nobody knows everything, you're not fooling anyone. So like, don't be afraid to learn and have conversations. That's, I guess, my main thing.
Thank you. Adrian.
Yeah, so I think my advice mostly boils down to just like, kind of just go for it. Like, you don't need like a PhD in specifically like gender studies or like LGBTQ studies to be an ally. Again, like I talked about before, it doesn't just end at like, oh, I'm just gonna be an ally and be nice and like accept people. Like, you have to, still educate yourself on the issues and like read about it and talk to people and stuff like that. But just because it's not like what you specialized in with your own like education, I almost said education, which I guess is relevant. Um, but um, you know, like, just because it wasn't your main focus initially, or it's not something you've like lived through personally, doesn't mean like you can't include it in your class. And so, you know, as long as you're willing to like educate yourself and then like listen to your LGBTQ students if they give you feedback, I think most people in the community are going to like recognize that and really appreciate that. Um, so it's not a matter of like, oh, I have to get everything 100% perfect the first time and like do like a doctoral thesis on LGBTQ issues. It's just kind of, you know, seeing where you can include us um, in the content that is already being taught about. And I think as you do that, you know, you'll find there's a lot of places where we tie in or where there are in LGBTQ historical figures who have contributed. So like if you're talking about like World War II, you can talk about Alan Turing. I feel like even though he's super, super well known, at least within the community and among historians, like he's not really talked about in like, especially maybe high school courses where you're learning about history. Um, so it's just a matter of like looking for places to have us included. And then the other big thing is intersectionality and thinking about that. You know, you don't want all of your LGBTQ representation and discussion and topics to be about like, you know, white American LGBTQ people. You want to include people from different countries, people of different races. You want to have like disabled and neurodivergent people included. So kind of just, you know, examine how you're talking about being LGBTQ and if there's like a cultural bias there, and make sure that you're, you know, elevating people who are maybe marginalized in other ways besides being LGBTQ. I think that's really important, especially because like LGBTQ history and like you know, the we think of like the gay rights movement, but we'll say like LGBTQ rights movement. It largely is started by and like contributed to by like, people of color, for example. So I think recognizing the way that it interacts with other identities is a really important thing to include in your course if you're going to talk about LGBTQ people in general.
Thanks, Adrian. Christopher.
Yeah, there is so much that can be said about this. I think it's so important to include LGBTQ plus in all content whenever you're able to. And kind of like Adrian just had said, it's not hard to find. You know, if you start to look, you'll find it. It's there. And then kind of going off what Allie had mentioned as well, if you're going to include the content, be sure that you're able to talk about it and that you're able to have an educated conversation about it. And also just make sure to let your students know that they should feel comfortable to be able to ask questions about it and not feel like they're stupid or, you know, they're being insensitive or anything like that. I can mention a handful of times that I've gone to Liz and been like, hey, I couldn't ask this because I don't know if this is appropriate to ask, but I don't know. So, you know, so just try to have that space where it's open and comfortable, where you're able to let students talk and ask questions. And if you're not able to answer it, you know, properly, let other LGBTQ plus individuals in your class, you know, step in and chime in who have lived those experiences to be able to help with that. And I just remember one example in a class we were talking about the early 1900s, and my professor was like, Ma Rainey, you know, black, feminist, you know, queer, you know, like bringing in all these different intersectionalities. And so don't just make sure we're talking about, you know, prominent white figures that we always see US history, you know, make sure that we're including these people that have a multitude of different intersectionalities, especially people of color, because they have been extremely prominent in the making of our country and the history of our country and continue to do so. So just make sure that you're highlighting multiple different aspects. Yeah, I think that's
Thanks, Christopher. Lux.
Okay. I think it's important to remember, what you're teaching needs to be accurate, but also how you present it. There's going to be people in your class that have their own unseen identities that all intersect, and the language you use is important just as much as the information you're presenting. For example, I had a professor kind of try to add a feminism unit into their course, but then just kind of spent the time, saying that there was no proof about what this one writer had talked about. So, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you tried, but it was just material put in there without, without any. It just seemed like, they were trying to appease. Like, oh, they'll just put this in there. So, and just the language used around it is, sometimes it's, instead of saying, male, female, or his, her, sometimes I've seen professors try to be inclusive, but as, like what Christopher had said too, that it's important to be able to talk about it if you're wrong. And it also, having that, it changes the atmosphere of the class too, knowing that there is, that there's queer content being taught, that it's almost like the ability to have discussions,
Thanks, Lux. Morgan.
So what I would say for educators who want to start educating about this is, firstly, if you need help, ask for help. I think that everybody in the Women and Gender Studies department and Liz would be willing to, help you if you're stuck on something. If you don't know, if you don't know something, you could definitely ask for help, or, even don't be afraid to just Google something too. Like, there's a lot of resources out there. Also, I know sometimes, like personally, when I am trying to come up with a project, or like if I'm teaching something and I don't really know where to go with it, but I want to incorporate like LGBTQ plus history, I just read a book. So I have like my little stack of books here that I'll show you, because I'm just going to recommend some books for everybody if you want to teach about LGBTQ plus stuff. This one's really good. I'm working through this one right now. It's Transgender History. I'm doing that in my trans non-binary lives class right now. I've worked about halfway through this one. This is a queer history. This one's really good. Reading all these history books is really nice, because I feel like, as you read through them, even if they're not directly related to your field, you're going to start to kind of generate ideas like, oh, this connects to this and this connects to this. Also, Life Isn't Binary. I like this book a lot. So yeah, I would just say, like, read and learn and ask questions and reach out to people. Yeah, everybody, wants to help you, and we want to see everybody succeed and everybody learn.
Thank you, Morgan. Wonderful. I'm curious if there's other questions from the audience. I know we've covered a lot of amazing ground in this discussion. Are there still things you're thinking about and wanting to ask?
Real quick, I'd just like to add to what Morgan just said with, like, educating yourself through, like, reading. I think that, it's also important to be looking at, um, film. You can watch documentaries about LGBTQ experiences, and I think that that's a really good way to um, learn more firsthand about the community and our experiences, especially because it can often be more emotional because you're actually seeing and hearing people talk about their lives, and you're seeing what's happening with your own eyes. And then alongside documentaries and books that are maybe more theory and real life history focused, I think looking at even just fictional depictions of LGBTQ people is, really, really helpful to a lot of folks because it just helps you see more about our experiences and just the diversity of the community. So if you can go out of your way to read and watch LGBTQ media, even if it's fictional, I think that can be really beneficial. So watching movies like Moonlight or a show maybe for cartoons like She-Ra or Steven Universe, those talk about LGBTQ identities and depict same gender romance and such in a really nice way. Um, Reading a book like Stone Butch Blues that shows many intersecting experiences between the lesbian community and the trans community. I think, even those fictional depictions can be really useful. So there are definitely other recommendations that I could give out if I had a bit more time to just think about them, brainstorm them. But I think really seeking those out is a good way to foster empathy and educate yourself on different identities and issues.
I guess I have to put my other hat on and piggyback that by saying there's also a lot of programs that the LGBTQ plus Resource Center and the Women's Center put on that can definitely increase knowledge if you're looking for easy ways to increase knowledge on campus. Christopher said he was just going to say that. Thanks, Christopher.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just kind of reiterating off that too, and even with the programs, there are so many of them that are student panels, and especially with Hope, so you're not only able to learn LGBTQ plus content and get more education on it, you get to hear from your actual students, from students at UW Oshkosh that live this every day. So it can kind of help draw a better connection.
Wonderful. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Andy or any of the panelists, any last words you want to say?
Well, I just want to say thank you to the panel. I mean, I really, really appreciate the thoughtful responses that you've brought and just all the different perspectives, many things that I think several of us hadn't, really thought of or been able to, I don't know, see as someone who teaches for the certificate in women and gender studies, and also in professional counseling, just thinking a lot about, the impact on students is really helpful. And I think this is a beautiful place for us to start as we talk about, continuing to build it. Oh, look, Liz remembered to do the evaluation form. So if you haven't, please fill out the evaluation form for this program. And remember that to watch out for the CEDAL programs in the spring for those 3 sessions to help build LGBTQ plus curriculum infusion.
I would like to just add my thanks to the student panel. You did an amazing job. And again, every time I listen to students talk, I learn something. And it reminds me again why I do what I do. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who came. It really makes me happy to see the number of people who see this as a really important issue to not only think about and discuss, but actually to do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.